Hello and welcome back to our study of the book of Mark. This week we follow Jesus as he ends his journey to Jerusalem. He's been walking all this time, and along the way he's healed people, he's taught his disciples about his death and resurrection, and now we see the scene changes because now instead of walking, he's going to ride, and instead of being secret about what he's been doing, things are going to be very public. So let's read. We're in Mark 11, 1 through 11, and it says, As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples, saying to them, Go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, Why are you doing this? Say, The Lord needs it, and will send it back here shortly. They went and found a colt outside in the street, tied at a doorway. As they untied it, some people standing there asked, What are you doing untying that colt? They answered as Jesus had told them to, and the people let them go. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut in the fields. Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. So we've seen this scene acted out in churches for years when they give children palm branches to wave. And we call this passage the triumphal entry. But really, there's nothing triumphant about it. It ends in an anticlimax. Jesus goes into the temple, looks around, and leaves. He doesn't do anything. This is not what they're expecting. So we see that Jesus, though, has this supernatural ability to know things. He tells his disciples where to find a colt and what to say when they're asked where they're taking it. And this is also... he's showing himself as a king here because a king was able to conscript whatever he needed for his service. He could just say, I need that colt. So, but he's different because unlike human kings, Jesus promises to return the colt. And then we don't see it in the story. We can be sure that it happened because, at the end of the day, he actually returns back to the town that he came from. He goes back to Bethany. Did he ride the colt back? No, the Bible doesn't say. But I can imagine the disciples had to take the colt back, and the owner saying, so how'd it go? And they must have been like, well, it wasn't what we expected. They must have been disappointed. They thought Jesus was going to claim his throne and kick out the Romans. They thought that he would take control of the temple. Instead, he looked around and he left. Not what they were expecting. Now, we've repeated that the first half of Mark deals with the question of who Jesus is, and in the very middle of the book, Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. And then the second half of the book of Mark is dedicated to the question of what kind of Messiah will Jesus be. Notice that it was the disciples here who got the crowd riled up. They're the ones who started putting their coats on the colt and led in the cheers, and as he rode in, they started shouting these messianic slogans. They were calling him the Messiah. They shouted, Hosanna, which means save us. They called blessings on the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. So surely he's going to the temple to be anointed king. Surely the time has come where Jesus is going to make Israel great again. But Jesus doesn't do what they expect. Mark says it was already late. Late for who? Late for Jesus? Didn't he get there when he should have? Did he get started late? Like, what happened? No, I think maybe it was late for the temple. The time of the temple in Jerusalem has come to a conclusion. And I think this makes the most sense because as we move on with the story, the next scenes will be of Jesus judging the temple. This is emphasized by his cursing of a fig tree that doesn't bear fruit, which we will see in the next passage. I can imagine that Jesus got to the temple, looked around, and was disappointed. The point of the temple had been to bring people to him. The author of Hebrews says that all these things in the temple and all that, they were shadows of the greater things to come, and that Jesus is that greater thing to come. The temple instead of pointing people to him, has become self-serving. It's not being a light unto the nations, and like it was supposed to be. And instead, it's not bringing people to God, it's burdening them with a yoke of religiosity. The temple represents power. It does not represent love and service. But Jesus isn't the kind of Messiah the people were expecting. He has come to serve. He has come to sacrifice. The real triumphant entry will happen a week later, when he walks the road to Calvary carrying a cross. He's raised up for all to see, enthroned on a cross. He's crowned with a crown of thorns. He's ridiculed, he's mocked, jeered, and spit on instead of cheered. But in this, he conquers. See, Jesus isn't like earthly kings. He's a king that gives his life for his people. And ultimately, he is vindicated when he's raised from the dead. So Jesus has not come with Israel's nationalistic hopes in mind. Rather, he has come to draw all nations to himself. The people wanted Jesus to fulfill their political aspirations, but he has nothing of it. He doesn't fight back. He turns the other cheek. And in losing, he conquers. The last shall be first. The least shall be the greatest. He is the servant of all. So throughout the centuries, one thing remains true. Jesus is not the kind of Messiah people want, but he is what we need.